Hi everybody, welcome to the Poetry Vlog. Today we have Prageeta Sharma. Prageeta, what did we talk about today?
Oh, we talked about writing poetry, particularly poems about grief. We talked about the Elegy as a poetic form. We talked about Alice Notley, the wonderful poet. We talked about sequencing and abstraction.
Perfect, thank you. So as always, you can find us online. You'll get all of that at the end of the episode, but in some, thepoetryvlog.com and at Propra for Twitter and at PropraMT on Instagram.
Yes.
Right, and the call for comments is at the end of the episode today because some conversations with students illuminated why we need to do that. But if you're a regular listener or viewer and not a student, I want to draw your attention to the podcast. We could use some reviews actually on iTunes, so you can subscribe there, and that link's at thepoetryvlog.com too. And then one other plug I want to put in is this season's now having a lot of students working on it. So if you want to support the students in the project, you can go to anchor.fm/thepoetryvlog/support and subscribe for $1 a month. It'll first reimburse equipment, just to be transparent, but once the basic things are covered, the rest of it will go among the different students. So that's a way to kind of give them an extra boost. Okay, I hope you all enjoy the episode. See you soon. Hi everybody, welcome to the Poetry Vlog. Today we have Prageeta Sharma with us. Prageeta, will you introduce yourself?
I'm Prageeta Sharma. I'm currently a professor at Pomona College in Claremont, California.
Perfect, thank you. What did you bring to read for us today?
I brought my new book, Grief Sequence. It's out from Wave Books. It just came out this last month.
Yep, I was actually really excited about it. I lucked out, they sent me review copies when I was like, I would like to teach it and do it in the class. So we're going to be teaching it winter quarter. So if you're UW South Seattle or UW Bothell students, that's when you're seeing this, but it should already be out and available. And Wave Books is one of my favorite presses. They're really lovely.
They are. Yes.
Would you mind reading for us?
Sure. You know, I will start with the first poem.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. This poem is after the poet Alice Notley, and I've really loved her poems, especially her poems that negotiate themes of grief, and she writes about widowhood. On seclusion and looking out. Seclusion may kill your heart in the process of producing the love-stained stench in your poems, the ones containing boundaries of shame with their sober problems, bits describing loss, mirroring its inward entanglements, blowtorches you have never seen before. You light them with two selves and don't wait for anything to flicker false. You can discern the lantern of a falling man who burned down his desire with tiny, humiliated gestures. The mountain peak so high, thus you believe it gives you the one majestic evening you earned. Its embrace is a gentle coercion into wide wilderness, an amenable tyranny of its expansion, grief's artillery to fill all of the black clouds, that sallow blue sky, painting it with electric photographic sweeps. You have to find your strength in this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Why did you choose that poem to read for us today?
I think it's the first poem in the book, and it helps, I think, for me, it reminds me of how it's kind of organized some of the directions the poems take that follow. I also think that Alice Notley's I think it's Mystery of Small Houses, was a book that I read throughout writing this book.
Okay.
And it felt like an instruction, and it also felt like a way to think about what I could do with abstraction and instruction.
Yeah. What do you mean by both of those things? So
Oh, sure.
how did it feel like an instruction, and how did it educate or kind of guide you in abstraction? Because it's funny, because I was going to comment that what I like about this book is how you managed to walk that line of like the classic like show versus tell, right?
Sure.
So where you're like kind of describing in an almost conversational way like what's happening in an almost abstract way, but then you will quickly jump back into a very material example of how that's felt. And I feel like a lot of poems around grief don't necessarily do that well, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But I feel like this one does. So
yeah, I think what I was having trouble with, which I think is documented in a lot of the poems, is the elegy as a poetic form,
Okay.
and that the elegy felt too crafted for the grief that I needed the poem to hold.
Yeah.
And often there's with too much precision or too much desire for an elegant poem, you end up losing a lot of abstraction, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to figure out how I could connect abstraction to unresolved states of feeling, which
Okay.
I think Alice Notley does a lot.
Yeah. I think maybe her most famous is The Descent of Valette.
Oh yes,
right?
yes.
Which was my introduction to her.
It's a beautiful book.
Yep. I think I need to pause for a second and think how I want to ask. I think the part that I can, so 2-part question again.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, for students tuning in, what would the traditional form of the elegy be, right? And then what did abstraction offer that you couldn't find in elegy? Or like, and what, can you give us an example of abstraction, if that makes
Sure.
sense? Because I know what you mean, because I'm like a theory head partly.
Okay.
But I feel like it
guess,
might, yeah.
I guess so. One thing that I've been wrestling with the lyric poem
Okay.
and the elegy is that in a lyric poem we have a first person, often singular, speaking subjectively about emotions,
Yeah.
and we're speaking out to the world about those emotions.
Yeah.
And that lyric I is in control of the subject matter, and I wanted to find a way for the lyric I to not be in control of the subject matter,
Okay.
and to allow other ideas, other experiences of tracking consciousness that go outside of the speaker's control,
Yeah.
to be allowed in the way grief, is like it kind of rolls through you.
Yeah.
And thoughts of the self are not all centered around narrativity.
Yeah.
And I wish we could, in general, as poets, think about poetry as marking time.
What do you mean by that?
I do not feel like I'm the same person I was.
Yeah.
And if I let that pass without documenting it, I wouldn't know what it looked like.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know what my language could mean.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know how to map out change. I mean, I'm being very abstract, but I really feel like I turned into a different person.
Yeah.
And this documents it.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for poetry for allowing me to be in time
Yeah.
in a way that life doesn't allow you to have.
And in time without having to make sense at the same time.
Yeah.
Which I feel like for me, a lot of the pressures of other genres is that need to either convey the argument or convey the character or convey the setting. Whereas I feel like with poetry, you're given a little bit more permission to be like fully present without it adding up.
Yes, absolutely. It's people talk about baby books when they write during the gestation period, and it's very clear what the journey is, and then there's so much transformation that happens.
Yeah.
I think the same thing happens with grief.
Yeah.
I think what happens is you have a window of, not everybody, but I had a window of time
Yeah.
where I was learning how to live again in in loss.
Yeah.
And it changed me, and it made me receptive. And lots of widows would say things to me like, in your raw grief, only spend time with people who know you. And it was really beautiful, just a beautiful way of thinking about who you let into your life. And it's very hard to explain, but when you're around a lot of people who suffer the same loss, it makes sense. So I guess what I'm saying is that I can only speak for this experience, but it changed me and made me receptive in a way that I had not planned. So the poems were also attempts at documenting a receptivity.
Yeah. I love that. I'm actually also thinking, this is maybe backtracking, but I was thinking about with my manuscript's called The Lyme Letters, and I was misdiagnosed with bipolar up until 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So the poems are working through being bipolar.
Oh, wow. And
right? With Lyme disease, and there's no other record.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Of like documenting it as it was at that time. And I'll have these kind of dissociative moments with it. And they're also reckoning with a different type of grief from a divorce. Yeah. But it tracks that, because some of them are written before I saw it coming, some are written when it happened, and some after.
Wow. Yeah.
And it can get kind of like, I don't, not using dissociative in the technical sense or the clinical sense, and I don't mean to like undermine that.
No.
But it's an almost kind of like stepping away and observing a version in a way that I never thought I would. And like, I was so like in it in that moment. I never thought there'd be a day where I stepped back and observe.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I wanted to write through the periods that I knew I would no longer have access to.
Yeah. Do you ever get that sensation when you're reading them of like seeing what's still very open and ongoing and things that are maybe now more closed up, or is it pretty consistent across them?
I don't know if I would write these poems again. Yeah. So they feel closed up to me. I don't know. I'm writing a new book and it's very different. Yeah. And so I think this is how the poems needed to look and how they needed to be. Yeah. And so I feel gratified that the form kind of was given to me.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Are you open to talking about the book you're working on?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can we hear about it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this new book is called One Mint. So ONEMENT. ONEMENT. Oh, I get One
it.
Mint.
Yeah.
And then WON, and it's after Barnett Newman's One series.
I don't know it.
So it's these really beautiful abstract expressionist paintings. They all sort of have, several of them have a kind of a line around on the kind of in the center of the canvas. Okay. I'm just trying to think of there's a variation in size. Some are huge. Yeah. And the title of the series for Newman is One Mint and then the number one.
Interesting.
1 Mint 1, and then he'll have 1 Mint 3, 1 Mint 4.
Yeah.
But I was looking at these paintings in a place of feeling joy again, and I felt like I won my 1 Mint.
Yeah, yeah, I get that actually.
And I started to write these poems that explored ideas of feeling whole. I was also reading the Katha Upanishads with my students in my Parasati.
I don't know that one either.
It's just the Vedic texts. Okay. It's like kind of contemplative philosophy on living and death. And the Katha Upanishad is dialogue among a father, a son, and a god around kind of what you owe, like what you.
Oh, interesting.
So what happened is I just asked my students to read the Katha Upanishad with me and figure out if we could put it into a poetic form, a Western poetic form. You know? And so I started to think about what could I translate between the East and the West around ideas of philosophical query and religion. But anyway, I guess I started to really figure out how I could have an assessment of wholeness in this new book through. And I also really found joy in looking at abstract expressionist work.
I get that. Yeah, I totally get that.
So that's all. And leaving, starting a new job, and having a new life. And figuring out what wholeness is.
Yeah, I love that actually. I'm gonna ask one more question before we start wrapping up. So almost every time we touch on a different question, we come back to abstract or abstraction.
Yes.
Which I actually love. I've always joked that I have the bad habit of trafficking in abstract thought.
Yes.
But I also enjoy it. I feel like a lot of people don't enjoy abstraction and don't enjoy like abstract I don't know, like thinking or text or art. And for me, that's kind of my MO. So I'm like going to very selfishly ask if you can talk a little bit about what abstraction offers you. Because I feel like whenever I've had folks on here, they've been like obsessed with getting away from abstraction.
Oh, yes.
And oftentimes I have to push students to get away from it because they're using it to not actually deal in an abstraction, if that makes sense. Like it's oversimplifying it, like cold, like I felt really cold that day. Is not when the whole poem is just describing it from that kind of back stance of it's meant to be material, but it's actually abstract because it's such a general statement.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure, yes.
But I think your writing is like extremely precise while also making room for abstraction. And now I'm hearing you're really drawn to it. So selfish question would be,
okay, so one thing about I'll say a few things that will arrive at abstraction.
Yeah.
When I was writing Grief Sequence, actually what started it was that I was having trouble thinking through sequences.
Okay.
And my dad actually is a mathematician who focuses on dyscalculia, and he works with learning disabilities. And he told me that when he diagnosed both of his kids around their, like, how do they think in terms of numeracy. And so he told me, you've always had trouble with sequences. I tested you when you were young. And so I joked.
That's so layered. That's a lot.
I loved this idea that he knew that my sequential thinking actually would fall into abstractions or...
Interesting. So like the kind of linear sequencing, meaning like A plus B equals C.
Yeah, so my linear thinking was always interrupted.
This is why we get along. This is like the great trial of my life.
So actually there's things in the book where he said, there's several kinds of sequential learning, and there's internal and external, and there's ways of processing information.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a way in which my brain likes to abstract. I also think that concretizing or thinking about details and description and the kind of the way the sentence is functioning were like places for me that were invitations to think about what language could do, because I wasn't settling on a certain idea of the concrete. I think, this is twofold, because I do think when we're going back to East and West, I think that Hindu philosophy and the scriptures and the work of Eastern writing from India is about abstractions. And so I guess what I'm saying is I wanted to figure out how to be true to what the poem could hold beyond description and observational details,
Yeah.
which I think I'm always teaching students how to do as part of craft in both the undergraduate and the graduate. And it started to feel performative for the poem to concretize, describe.
Yeah.
Why do we have to start with place? Why do we have to start with the speaker in a certain way? I felt that the poems in the last 25 years were getting dulled by their prescriptive model.
Yeah.
So,
I would totally agree with that.
I'm not saying that I can't. I mean, I probably, there are dull moments probably in my work for people, but I guess I'm interested in thinking through ideas of what excites me, and abstract. If we think about the visual culture, and I love abstract paintings. I love thinking about mimesis, and is the poem starting to become too mimetically derived in the last 30 years?
Which MFA culture plays into a lot.
And who's getting rewarded for a kind of mimetic writing
and legibility.
Legibility.
Right?
Yeah,
because abstraction doesn't lend itself to being understood.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of popularized poetry and academic movements are about making something understandable, which is actually to be super overgeneralizing, a super Western colonial way of approaching knowledge. So it's kind of ironic.
Yes, exactly. And I think the legibility. I think lots of us were taught that our legibility was about teaching others about our culture.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, if I really wanted to get into what was culturally me, it would be something around ideas of holistic thinking and philosophy. My dad's even, his cognitive science is more interesting to me than necessarily the rituals we've performed as a family.
Yeah. I relate to that really intensely, actually. And I always tell my students that once you let go of needing to make sense and needing to be legible and needing to find legibility in someone's poems, needing to understand it, you can experience that kind of different type of pleasure, which might be some projection. I've always been told I think wrong, right? Because I don't think subject, verb, object, or A plus B equals C, and that's been performed in social settings as much as in academic, right, and other places. So it might be that I find pleasure in that, not everyone does.
I mean, as poets, we should be finding pleasure in what language offers us, and it's also the fact that in our communities we need to think about our own innovations, not just what people need for us to reproduce.
Yeah. Thank you for watching this episode of the Poetry Vlog with Prageeta Sharma. Prageeta, thank you for coming up here from Pomona and being part of this on the actual video.
It's a pleasure.
And having such an open discussion about both your thoughts and your feelings, if that makes sense. Is there anything that we didn't get to today that you want to mention?
I think it's just been terrific to be here in Seattle and getting to meet you, and I just love the community of writers and readers and thinkers in Seattle.
Awesome.
So I'm grateful, and Bothell and the Washington community.
Yeah. So you've got someone who's familiar with your community, and I want to encourage everyone to get your own copy of Grief Sequence. This is not a guarantee, but in the past when I've had classes order from Wave Books, they sometimes offer a discount for students.
I think so.
And so if you're my students, some of you were required to get this book, but if it wasn't your book club book, I still really recommend it. It's really good. And then remember to find you where online?
You can find me on Twitter, and I think it's PraPra, and Instagram, which is PraPraMT.
Perfect. And then, of course, the Poetry Vlog is on Instagram. We have a new social media intern research assistant, so you can find that at the Poetry Vlog. Twitter's I'm still doing, and it's merged with mine, but it's at the Poetry Vlog. And then we have our website, thepoetryvlog.com. And if you sign up for our email newsletter, I'll send you stickers and magnets and cards because I have too many. It's really that simple. And actually, if you share your mailing address, I'll send you some too. Because I ordered way more than I need, and I really love sending things in the mail for some reason. So that's available as well. And of course, subscribe and like this video. And if you're one of my students, the call for comments today is to talk about your relationship to grief and elegiac writing. Is there anything you want to add? Things you'd be interested in hearing from students?
I'd love to hear what they think the elegy can be.
Perfect. So tell us what you think the elegy can be. And that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Season 3 is brought to you with support from the Simpson Center,
Also, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation.
the Jack Straw Cultural Center,
And you, the students. Thank you so much.
and specifically 7 students that are doing all of this behind the scenes production. Find out more at thepoetryblog.com.
You're all saints. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Or you're like the anti-saint, depending on your
Same thing.
preference.
Yeah.
Right.